Okay, Kevin, now that you have convinced me, you have persuaded me to go to networking, but
Okay.
I've never been to a networking event or I'm not used to going there, then is there any practical tips that you can give someone like me to when they go to networking? Like, let's start with what should I talk about while I'm in the meeting? Should I talk about myself or should I ask question and listen to other people? Like you just mentioned, we should try to learn, right, while we are in the meeting. So any practical tips for that?
Yeah. So think about the people that are going to networking meeting just like you, right? And I do not propose or suggest that you only talk to senior people. I think you should talk to a whole range of people. Because again, if you go there with the intention to connect and to learn, you shouldn't discriminate just because that person is not senior, that there's nothing to learn from, right? Otherwise, again, you're creating apprehension for yourself, senior person, how should I behave? So talk to everyone that you have the opportunity to come in contact with. And when it comes to what to talk about, it's quite depending on the situation and the person and how many people in the group, for example. But in the context of, let's say you're in a group, whether it be 2, 3 people or 4 people or whatever, and people come and ask you questions about you, like, hey, Francis, what do you do then? Now, then you should have like maybe a couple of minutes, not too long, to talk about the things you're currently doing, why you're doing it, are you enjoying it, and it would just be done because it may be the beginning of something long, or maybe they just wanted to, to just get a conversation going, but you're not the only guy of focus. So you want to give space, but also give enough detail about you so you're saying that I'm interested in conversation, I'm engaging. So I would always suggest that you have this 2 or 3 minute blurb about yourself ready to go off at a roll of your tongue so you don't have to think about it at the time, right? But generally speaking, I'd find that if the group is somewhat, or the person that I met, and I don't know anything about this person, I would refrain about talking too much about myself in the beginning. I would be more proactive in asking questions from the shallow end and just to build some rapport. Things like something that is personal enough, but it's not intrusive. Things like, oh, so, and also the type of question, my favorite would be called open question. Open questions only start with one of two words. It's either what or how. Apart from those 2 words, do not start a sentence unless you can make a question with those 2 words to begin with. The reason is that you cannot answer these questions with a simple yes or no. And it's designed to force you to elaborate so that we don't have a yes-no answer. Is okay, silence again. And you keep asking a series of yes-no questions, and then it becomes awkward. So most people don't understand this particular technique, and they ask something like, oh, do you or have you? And they say, yes. And then a person didn't elaborate. They said, oh, okay, then what happened? Oh, then this happened. And then they stop again. So some people are hard to talk to because they're not used to this kind of environment. And then you have to accommodate them, right? So I'll probably say something like, so what brought you here today? How did you know about the event? What brought you here? How did you know about the event? Those are the things you can't say yes. Yes, what? Right? You have to tell me the underlying, oh, well, I knew about the events because I received this notification. And so, oh, how do you receive the notification? Well, because I work in this industry and this is what I'm doing. Oh, okay. So what do you do exactly? So you see a series of things that I do, I keep using how and what. Okay. Now, there's one thing that I personally have observed and know to be true, especially for the more senior people. they all love to talk about themselves. They love to tell you their stories. They're not really that interested in yours, but they loved if you ask them so that they can tell you their stories. So ask them. You will never get the end of it. And that's how you would be able to build rapport very quickly in a very short time. If that person feels the desire to engage, and they feel that desire because they're talking about their favorite subject themselves.
So in that case, we should always ask more questions about the other person, right? Instead of always talking about me, right?
Right. I mean, there is a balance, right? And the way I would look at the balance would be, okay, let's ask you a couple of very shallow questions. What brought you here? How do you know about the event? The minute I ask, what do you do? It gets a next level deeper. Okay. And then after I said, how, what do you do? Said, oh, that's interesting. And so what I would do is to use the answer that you give me, and I would pick on one point that I didn't understand or I find interesting, and I would use that to create another question for you to elaborate on. So let's say, Francis, what do you do? He said, well, I'm a tutor for, geography students, for international school students. I said, oh, interesting. So why only international schools? Maybe my next question, right? And then you're going to say, well, because of this, and that. Oh, wow, that's so. Generally, I would give it maybe 4 to 5 questions coming from me in a row, and then I would stop. The minute I stop, let's say you're my conversation partner. The minute I stop, you would either tell me more, or you would ask me a question, because you notice that you've been talking all the time and I haven't been talking at all. And you feel a little bit sorry for me, right? And say, oh, what about you, Kevin? I said, oh, what about me? Well, what do you do? Oh, okay. Same question I asked you. Why? Because if you answer my questions, then I'm sure that you won't mind me asking you the same questions. And this is very reciprocated, and there's no risk, right? If you choose to tell me what you do and you choose to elaborate on things that I ask, then of course, I don't mind telling you this myself. So you would find it safe to ask me the exact question that I ask you. Now, by the time this exchange is done, 5 questions here, 5 questions there, easily 10 minutes have gone. In a very continuous flowing information that you get to know about each other, at least some basic level on what you do, why you're here, and some other interesting things. Now, in a network situation, for a concentrated conversation between 2 people for 10 minutes is rare. So if you keep having these 10-minute conversations all night long, I consider that a raging success. And it's not hard to do, is it? Because in my humble opinion, it's far easier to get this type of quality conversation on a one-on-one basis than you joining a group of, let's say, 4 or 5. Because once you're in a 4 or 5, you have to start considering what everybody else is doing. You don't feel good about only asking one person question and ignoring the rest of them. So it's just kind of messy. My favorite is just to try to pin one person down and have a series of these conversations.
Yeah, or sometimes in a group setting, other people will just interrupt while that person is answering your question. And then the conversation just get off track. Yeah. And so what about, like, is there any general can opener question? Like, is it only, or what do you do? What do you study? Is there other type of common question that is safe to ask and people will usually find it interesting to answer and there's a lot to talk about? Is there any basically can opener sample question that we can use?
I tend to stick with the safest and the most sure thing, because in the initial few minutes of the conversation, it sets the tone for the rest of it. So I'm a very risk averse person to ask anything beyond the most acceptable, beyond the most expected. So within those questions, I try to select the most meaningful ones to ask. So we can talk about the weather, but it's not very meaningful. I mean, what can you talk about, right? You can talk about, oh, where you're coming from, but some people are a little bit sensitive about it. You can talk about, how much do you enjoy your job? Well, you could ask that, but maybe once I get to know you a little bit better. So there are many questions that you could potentially ask at a not too deep a level, but it requires, in my humble opinion, certain rapport in order for you to begin to ask it without feeling awkward. So the can opener question that you refer to, in my humble experience, it's not too many of them. But I stick with the basic ones. It might sound a little bit boring, but I'm not trying to be special, and I'm not trying to create a show. I'm trying to make a connection. So to me, what works is more important than whether it's beautiful and whether it's exciting. So you could say, how's your day? But it's a little bit too general. Oh, fine. And then what? How's yours? Right? I've tried them all, for instance. I've had those awkward moments myself, right? And that's why I need to ask a question that needs to have some teeth. You can't just say yes, good, fine, right? You have to give me something a little bit more than that.
I see. So it's kind of like you ask the safest question just to get the conversation starting and to test the water, see if the other person is willing to share a bit more. And if he or she just give you a short answer, then maybe probably it's not going to be a long conversation. Maybe you just get the basic connection and then you move on to someone else.
Very true. And just because I say ask this question does not mean every single person is going to engage you wholeheartedly. You can judge by the way of their eye contact. Are they looking at you? Are they paying you attention when they speak? Or are they looking around and just mumbling something and then occasionally look at you, smile with a fake smile, and then have a drink? That means they're not interested. Okay. And if that's the case, after about 3 questions, say, well, it's really nice meeting you. I'm just going to say hello to a friend. So I'll see you later. Just make it, exit eloquently. I would always recommend that, right? Because those people, you may not be their target audience, let's put it this way, because they came in with a different agenda than you. You might come here to learn, but he's here for business. He's here to make a deal, right? So you don't look like someone I can make a deal with, so I don't want to waste time on you. Fine, then don't. And don't take that personally.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Any other point you want to add for what to say?
Just hold out on listening. I think there's really something I want to emphasize is when you ask the question, do not utter a word when you listen. Refrain from interrupting that person. It's the most magical thing when you do not interrupt, how much the person is willing to divulge and how much dead air creates the motivation for them to tell you everything they shouldn't have told you. Right? So silence is gold.
Thanks, Kevin.